RetroDaze.
Recently, while reading our channel's official novel, Tommy and the Order of Cosmic Champions, written by Tony Rapino and based on a story by Tony Great, I spent a lot of time reminiscing about trips to my local comic store. The comic shop Tommy frequents in the novel is a place that holds hope, mystery, and happiness around every corner. After reading those scenes, I'd close my eyes and attempt to remember all the little details of those stores. Each one was a little different, but they all held the same sense of wonder, because behind any one of the colorful comic book covers, entire worlds existed, each with their own rules, powers, heroes, and, yeah, even villains.
It was a new kind of toy store and one I was keen to explore at every given opportunity. Of course, as Tony wrote the novel, he also thought back to his own comic shops. The weirdest of the bunch was not much more than a single display case with some shelving on the wall inside the entrance of a video rental store on 86th Street in Brooklyn, New York. They didn't have endless aisles and shelves to look through like other places, but they did have mailboxes, a bank of narrow cubbyholes with customers' names on them, where the shopkeeper would stash comics you requested, and in some cases, ones he thought you'd like based on your other choices. Tony jumped at the opportunity to have his own mailbox where comics would magically appear week after week, even if he often passed on purchases. For some reason, early on, he was particular about only wanting certain titles. Those first comics for him, strangely perhaps, were Now Comics' second series of Married with Children, published from 1991 through 1992, and later the Collector's Specials and the Kelly Bundy miniseries.
We're talking bass fishing off the station club.
Ultraverse on sale today.
Comic book store. Let's go.
They couldn't be there in 38 for the launch of that Super Guy, or in 62 for the launch of that Spider Guy, but they can be there now for the birth of the Ultraverse.
Climb that way.
Prime Hard Case, first editions in comic shops June 16th. To enter to win one of 200 special edition posters, call this number now.
Soon after, he began buying issues of Brigade, created by Rob Liefeld and published by Image Comics. The 4-issue series was far from a weekly or even monthly release, with the first issue coming out in August of 1992 and the final, 4th issue, hitting shelves in July of 1993. Enter young Tony, who would ask about new issues every single time he entered the store, which was usually multiple times a week. During those trips, he'd take full advantage of all the freebies on the front counter, like the stacks of comic shop news, promo postcards, and flyers. It was another comic store owner from one of the larger shops that eventually said, "You know, you can buy other comics too." Sure, he was probably frustrated that Tony came in every week looking only for a Brigade and then leaving with as much free stuff as he could carry, but Tony still took that piece of advice as a great epiphany. That's when he really started to collect, buying new #1 issues of Image Comics, yet also dipping into classic superhero offerings like Superman, The Incredible Hulk, Venom, X-Men, and Spider-Man. But remember, this was the early 90s, which saw a great renewal in the landscape of comics, bringing in younger readers who previously had no interest in comics with the likes of Image, Dark Horse, and Valiant. It was through these publishers, especially Image, that Tony developed a taste for the darker titles. He'd snatch up copies of Violator, Virus, The Max, Pit, Savage Dragon, Aliens, and Spawn, and still be hungry for more. It was also right around the same time that one of the biggest comic book events of the 90s, if not the biggest, took place: the release of The Death of Superman. In December 1992, the first part of a planned 3-part story arc was released, and it seemed the entire comic book world coalesced in a frenzy around the black poly bag filled with Superman number 75, a poster, commemorative stamps, Daily Planet obituary, black mourning armband, and trading card. It was the must-buy comic of the decade and sold over 6 million copies. No self-respecting collector could ignore the release, even if many eventually felt as though it was nothing more than a publicity stunt.
Can it be true? Superman will die November 18th at the hands of a villain named Doomsday?
Up in the sky, it's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's a corpse. Come mid-November, Superman will be flying all right to heaven. His S will grace his casket rather than his chest. After 54 years, DC Comics has decided to kill off Superman.
After 50 some odd years, to get people to notice, sometimes you have to go to extremes.
You see, Superman has an image problem.
I think he's corny.
Yeah, I don't like him.
It's a bird.
It's a plane.
He's kind of a dork.
Teenagers these days prefer more violent characters, ones like the Punisher, Wolverine, the Infinity War.
I think they do it just to get money, and then, like, he's going to revive in 2 days.
There's too much money tied up in Superman for him to stay dead forever. And nobody knows what his Kryptonian physiology is like.
If you were collecting comics in 1992, and perhaps even if you weren't, you probably bought a copy, or 10, and most likely went right ahead and bought The Adventures of Superman number 500 in the white poly bag too. Because all kids had some connection to comics, even if it was only through Tim Burton's Batman movie. Maybe you never purchased a comic yourself, but I'll bet at least one of your friends had, and they probably dragged you with them on occasion to peruse the aisles too. These stores were mystical places filled with stacks of white long boxes and front-facing new issues on metal stands. Vibrant posters and artwork often lined the walls, and it wasn't uncommon to find action figures and other toys too. Trading cards were stacked in little display boxes on the front counter, standees littered the floor, and an element of otherworldly excitement permeated the space.
From a far-off world come travelers in search of the outer limits.
Greetings!
Comic books, magazines, model kits, posters.
Plutonium!
Outer Limits 457 Moody Street, Waltham, Mass. 8910444.
If you never set foot in a full-fledged comic shop, then perhaps you glanced at one of those spinning metal racks at the corner store, rusty and squeaky with age. Or maybe you flipped through a friend's comic collection in their bedroom while waiting for them to set up their Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo. My point is this. Comics were as pervasive as video games, and most kids had at least a fleeting interest in them. I have to generalize here because it's not like I have statistics on the matter, and there's always going to be outliers, children who somehow avoided even setting wayward eyes on a single page being read by a friend. But that's okay. When we talk about nostalgia, I can usually count on most viewers relating. In this case, history helps make sense of the large number of 80s and 90s kids who were enthralled by comics. According to Jesse Kowalski, 1985 through 1996 was labeled the Dark Age of comics. From the mid-1980s through the early 1990s, anti-heroes were popular. Dark, pessimistic stories reigned, as in Alan Moore's Watchmen, where a world looks down on once mighty superheroes, or in Frank Miller's Batman: The Dark Knight Returns, where a 55-year-old Batman has retired from crime fighting, leaving criminals to terrorize Gotham City. Readers witnessed Superman dying, Batman becoming critically injured, and Green Lantern Hal Jordan slaughtering his fellow Green Lanterns. This darker edge to comics reached its peak in the 90s, the same period that spawned Mortal Kombat and grunge rock. No, this is not a coincidence. All had their roots in the same jaded, cynical Gen X attitude that was common at the time, according to tvtropes.org. This is no doubt one of the reasons, beside being at the right age at the right time, Tony became fascinated with comics. It's no revelation to constant viewers that he's both a horror fan and a horror writer, so anything of the darker bent no doubt drew him in. Dark Horse Comics, founded in 1986, Valiant Comics, founded in 1989, and Image Comics, founded in 1992, were among the creator-owned companies that led the pack in those days. This same period is noteworthy for being one of the comic industry's booms in production and sales, followed immediately by a huge slump and oversaturation of titles, which in many cases would fail to increase in value.
Once upon a time, a comic book cost a dime, and they were bought and read almost exclusively by youngsters. Well, these days, the cheapest comic book costs at least $1, and even big corporations collect them as one of the best investments around. But as Bob Nixon found out, a comic book convention is still mainly a place for wide eyes and young people.
The
Free! Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man!
This is the hectic world of comic book trading. Hundreds of collectors, young and old, have gathered in Victoria to swap, buy, and just leaf through their favorite comics. A lot of adults collect comic books these days, but the main buyers still rely on allowances and paper route money.
Well, there's a lot of, I call it guilt money out there where, you know, parents just don't have the time for their kids to do exactly everything that they want, and they say, here, have $20 or $40 and go down and buy some comics. At least you're reading.
Comic books have been big business for years. Some early Superman comics go for tens of thousands of dollars a piece, and even a 7-year-old copy of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cost $25. So some young collectors have acquired the street smarts of penny stock traders.
You got to pretty well guess which comics are going to go up because you don't really know until they're a few months old, and by that time they're already around $10. So a lot of speculation in it.
And then when you get Todd McFarlane to sign one of the comics, then it doubles in value usually.
It was the great comic book bubble of the 1990s. Comics were incredibly popular for all the reasons we've discussed, and publishers were profiting off the intense interest with limited collector's editions, foil covers, alternate covers, holograms, poly bags, embossed covers, and so much more. Essentially, publishers offered multiple versions of their comics, which influenced fans to buy extra copies of a single title. Only, they were also selling huge print runs of these comics that far too many people bought, and not enough people wanted in later years, causing their value to stagnate and even drop in some cases. Meanwhile, Wizard magazine helped young collectors keep track of their comics' values, giving the impression of a thriving secondary market. Of course, young Tony was blissfully unaware of the comic book bubble bursting because he was too busy actually enjoying the comics he bought by, reading them. These days, Tony still has his old long box filled with those mostly worthless 80s and 90s comics, and he even occasionally adds to them with cheap yard sale and flea market finds. Seldom he even takes a trip to his local comic shop to peruse the shelves, and though he doesn't regard himself as a collector anymore, he'll still add a few interesting titles to his trusty long box. Mostly, though, he's left his fascination with the comic shop and comics in the past, where he sometimes visits on rainy summer afternoons when there's nothing else to do and his mind craves a flight of fancy.
Gen X Comics and Collectibles, the next generation of the comic book specialty store, is celebrating its grand opening this Saturday at Westgate Mall. Hundreds of dollars in grand opening giveaways will be handed out during this celebration. Gen X has the hottest books in the country, like X-Men, Spawn, Wildcats, Gen 13, plus the latest in non-sports cards, new comics weekly, and hundreds of back issues. Gen X also features in-store specials on comics, t-shirts, cards, and specialty items every week. Don't miss the grand opening of Gen X Comics and Collectibles this Saturday at Westgate Mall.
I too like returning to the comic shop in my mind, the one I remember from when I still believed in magic, where the smell of paper and plastic intermingle and create a fascinating bastion of imagination. The one that convinced me if I wished hard enough, even I could fly. It's a special place apart from time, but as tangible as the camera in front of my face. Much like the library and the used bookstore, the comic shop promised limitless worlds of exploration and wonder. The shop packed its shelves with heroes and villains, utopias and dystopias, wonders and horrors, all for our little hands to grasp. You should visit your own sometime and let me know what titles you find still sitting on the shelf. I would love to hear about it down in the comments. And if you enjoy our content, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and maybe even activating that ubiquitous notification bell. It really does make a huge difference. Let's meet again next week to celebrate Yesteryear, right here on RetroDaze.
Clicky clacky.